today really is to give you a bit of an insight into exactly what certification schemes are. We'll briefly be going over in that, and then touching on the pros and cons, give you some example schemes that we're looking at, and finally how to choose which certification scheme. And as Ina said, it's quite a complex topic, so we'll try and keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. So to start with, hotels and the hospitality sector in general are needing to become more and more aware of their environmental impacts and also wider impacts on the community, so socially and economically. In addition to this, we're seeing great increases in the number of eco-conscious travellers and green tourists. So in light of this, we're seeing increased popularity of green certification, with hotels wanting to capitalise on that. And really the crux of this comes down to, is it worth it? Are these certifications worth going through? And that is the big question that we'll try and give you some insight on. And within that, what we're really looking at is, do these certification schemes improve the sustainability performance of hotels? Do they improve operating efficiency and reduce operating costs? And do they increase consumer awareness? So to start with, what is certification? So they have a lot of names you might see. So green eco rating, sustainability certification scheme, green rating, green certification, all essentially referring to the same thing. And they will generally look to measure and assess a hotel's performance in these three key areas: environment, social, and economic. In addition to that, we see a lot of focus on management and governance, which is really important. So sort of putting the framework in place to ensure that sustainability initiatives in all of these areas are implemented, they're managed, and they're monitored. So certifications are awarded to hotels that either meet specific criteria, so specific compulsory criteria, or they can hit a certain percentage compliance of overall criteria. So you see some variance between schemes in terms of they might have some suggested guidelines, some compulsory guidelines, whereas others will be just to hit a percentage of the overall criteria. Now, really where the complication starts to come in is the difference in assessment criteria and methods that we see between a lot of schemes, which is why it's been more confusing for hotel operators and more confusing for the consumer as well. They don't know what to recognise and what to look for. So we're going to be diving into that in a little bit more detail. So next we'll look at some assessment methods of certification. So this is generally done in two ways. So first being performance-based, which is generally quantitative data. So this would tend to look and assess hotels on a scoring-based system. So if we would think of this an example of waste, a certification scheme that's performance-based would look to measure your general waste outputs in terms of kilograms of waste, say per week or per month. And that's how it would look to track and assess a hotel's performance, as opposed to process-based, which is, if we were to think of it in the same example with waste, a process-based certification would say, are there procedures in place to ensure that general waste is managed and monitored per week or per month? So both both assessment methods have their strengths and weaknesses. It's worth sort of pointing out with a process-based method how important it is to have your own goals on top of this, which will give you some examples of schemes that are both performance-based and process-based later. But it's worth sort of noting how they both do have their strengths and weaknesses, and the ideal accreditation scheme would really have a mixture of both, have a mixture of the two of them. So next slide here, we have some benefits of certification schemes. Now, as I touched on to start with, if these schemes are effective and if they're implemented effectively, what we'll generally see is improved environmental, social, and economic performance. And again, as I said, if these initiatives are implemented correctly, that should reduce your operating costs and efficiency. If you're being more energy efficient and more resource efficient, this will also improve your top and bottom line. And other benefits they may have are regulatory requirements, so taking into account local legislation and national legislation, which can be a really sort of overwhelming topic to get round. And particularly local schemes can, provide this information in quite a succinct way that allows you to sort of checklist it off. And perhaps I'll pass you on to Xenia, who can maybe talk about the benefits of the marketing.
Yes, and to pick up from what Bud was just saying about the regulatory requirements, there's quite a lot of new laws coming out, especially in the EU at the moment with the Green Deal. So in order to not, lose your head over that, that's quite good with the certifications. They will embark whatever is being put out there at the moment and whatever regulatory changes there are. So that gives you a certain level of security and safety on that. And then marketing, yes, obviously, this is all a bit about trust and winning the client's trust, especially after what's going on with COVID. So the issue of having a certification helps you to sort of endorse that message of you can trust us, we've got the certification, and then you can use some of the contents to market. But do not rely on the certifications to market for you, but make it part of your communication campaign and use the sort of USPs and take control of that process yourself. Right, next.
Great, thank you. So on to a few of the limitations. So as I've started to touch on, there are a lot of schemes out there. So it's estimated that there could be as many as 800 schemes that hotels and hospitality sector could take part in. If we think of ones that are more tailored and more specific to the hospitality sector, it's close to around 200, which is still sort of an overwhelming number to get round and really do your research in each one and understand each one. So this includes all regional and global certification schemes. And as I've also started to mention, they vary a great deal in their assessment method and criteria. So we'll touch on that a little bit more later, but in terms of where they focus, where they put their focus on, so environmental, social, or economic, or governance. They also vary in the way they're completed. So some are self-completed checklists, others are slightly more comprehensive online learning platforms, and minimal validation. So we're looking for third-party validation in any robust scheme here, really. And finally, cost. Cost is obviously going to be the big biting point for a lot of independent hotels, especially. And most schemes operate on an annual renewal basis and will not include an audit fee or travel expenses. So the costs can quickly mount up, particularly if you're needing to recertify and go through any additional checks.
Okay, so there are factors to consider. Obviously, there's an industry focus that, whether they focus more on if you're a tourism business or you're a hotel business. Are you international group? Are you a regional group? Are you a local group? So again, very important. If you're just based in one country, potentially you can be looking at a country certification rather than an international one. Cost is something that Bud already mentioned a couple of times. Some of them are much more expensive. EarthCheck, for example, is probably one of the most expensive, but they're also one of the most comprehensive, and they offer you tools. However, a lot of their framework is already embarked within the EU legislation. So you're paying for something that potentially here we have to do by law. So EarthCheck is very good for Asia and South Pacific area, and they're very strong there. Again, what standards and frameworks do they embark? A lot of them now thankfully have integrated the UN SDGs. Some are ISO orientated as well. And then there's, as Bud also mentioned, the methods of assessment. Some are more thorough and some less. Then you have levels, which again, as EarthCheck and Green Globe, they have the sort of bronze, silver, gold potential there. I think the GTBS in the UK does as well. There is the monitoring and renewal period. Is it yearly? Is it 2 years? And then again, the areas of sustainability are covered. Some of them cover more social aspects, some more environmental. We'll dive into that as well. who is verifying it? Have you got auditors coming? Was it self-assessment? And then again, this issue of transparency and trust. What can you display and what issues can you take out of your certification processes in order to communicate that with your guest, or even if you're doing a sustainability report?
Okay, brilliant, thank you for that. Here we have some example schemes. Now, sort of the intention here is not to go through every scheme available in-depthly. We have compiled some extensive research on more schemes that we'll go through today. So if that's something that you're looking for, or more information on one scheme in particular, then you can get in touch and we can see if we can help. So we've compiled a database of 26 of the most widely used hospitality schemes. But what I want to do here is just kind of discuss some key similarities and some key differences that we see across schemes. So firstly, if we note whether they're performance-based or process-based, as I touched on before, it's really important that you're aware of what this means. And if you are looking to gain a process-based certification award, then you must have your own goals in place and be fully aware of that. So if we discuss EarthCheck and Green Globe initially first, they separate themselves really because of their online learning platform and industry benchmarking that comes with this. So very comprehensive database, but with this, they're much more expensive and labor intensive than a lot of other schemes that are on the market. As opposed to Green Key and Travel Life, which are more checklist oriented, but have very robust criteria that is specific to the hospitality sector. So very strong schemes again then, and because of this are much more competitively priced. So not only are they applicable for hotel groups and global hotel groups, they're also more applicable for independents. And as opposed to, we've included BREEAM here, which is obviously more building focused and is very well known for that. But with their recent updates in version 6, they've placed a lot more emphasis on health and well-being. So it's interesting to see whether that will have much effect and whether hotels will adopt BREEAM in use. And Green Growth 2050, again, a very robust but less known scheme. So this is just to give you an example of what's out there and the key differences. And as I said, if there's more information that we can give you on specific ones, then get in touch. So this really is quite self-explanatory, but what we've aimed to do here is just to give you some indication of the emphasis of each scheme. Now, all schemes will, to a more or less extent, cover environment. With that particularly said, Green Key places more focus on this than others perhaps, but they will all to a greater or less degree cover it. Now, where we see major differences creep in is in regard to management and in particular and social impacts, and just given some overview there.
Sorry, we'll have to click through again. So we were just on the, here we go.
Here we are.
So again, what theme is right for you as a hotel or your business? So if you're an independent hotel or just a couple of properties, again, as I mentioned before, it might be worthwhile looking at your regional certifications. Here in Germany, we have something called Green Sign. They're very solid. In Ireland, you have the Sustainable Travel Ireland. The Nordic countries have Swan and Eco Label. Whereas Green Key is sort of born in Netherlands, they've now become very international. But yes, you have your programs for each country, so that's worthwhile looking at. And then potentially also if you're a resort, there is something like Biosphere, you've got more that you're doing on conservation, maybe as a resort, be it, you know, ocean conservation or land conservation, whatever, then it's worthwhile potentially looking at those. Again, if you're a hotel group or an international hotel brand, it's definitely worth going down the route of an international certification that you can apply everywhere, where Green Key really is one of the most internationally recognized, followed probably by Green Globe and EarthCheck. And then if you're a real estate fund and you're sitting there and you're owning hotels, then obviously there's that whole reporting around financial impact and financial reporting, and that's where GRESB sits. And some of the certifications within the hotels can feed into the GRESB certification process as well. But did I miss anything on that one?
No, I think that's yeah, that's covered most of it. I'd say, you know, it's really important to consider particularly with resorts, like you said, geographical locations are a huge factor here. So if the scheme has more emphasis on biodiversity, it's not going to be as relevant to you if you're in an urban location. Whereas if you're a beachside resort and you're looking kind of expansion and the effect this will have, so your land use, then you'll really want to consider that with what scheme you're pursuing. So you want it to be as tailored to you as possible. It's also important, not just how robust and how accurate the scheme is, but what your scenario is. So that's just as important, really. And this brings us to the final slide. So what does this all mean? So it's really important to understand why you're looking to gain a certification. This shouldn't be the be all and end all answer. It's really important to see that this is very much the start of a journey. So as I said, not just with process-based schemes, you should be setting your own goals, but there should be wider goals and wider frameworks in place in addition to this scheme. And be aware, are you looking to gain a scheme because you want to improve your performance, you want to discover sort of new sustainable technologies, a marketing tool? Be very aware of what the reasons are, and then look into the schemes from that, and you'll be able to gain a much better idea of which is more suitable. So do your research, consider as much of the factors as we've just been through. As I said, we're more than happy to give our guidance. If there's anything that you're unsure on, we've compiled some extensive research in this area, so I feel like we're in a good impartial place to advise hotels on what's best for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to go back onto what Bud said yesterday, I was part of the UN Global Compact conference that we're celebrating 20 years and the new ambitions. Just to remember, we've got really 10 years now to make a difference. And that's 4,000 days, as somebody said yesterday, which is a scary fact. So really, really important to set your goals and make sure that you keep improving on your goals. So whatever certification process you do take, you make sure that you improve and then you don't just tick it off and forget about it for the rest of the year. So it's got to be an ongoing process and a journey, as Bud says. So that's really it. If you want more information, do let us know. Again, we've got various toolkits available on various topics that can help you with some of those certification processes as well. And if you're looking at various topics, let us know. These are the ones that we've got already available: the food waste, the CO2 emission reduction, biodiversity, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But we're also working on more around single-use plastics, in particular in view with what's going on now with COVID. The sustainable procurement, we've got a webinar coming up on that. Certifications we've just mentioned, legislation, we had a webinar, and also communication. So if you've missed any of our webinars, do go onto our YouTube channel. And the next one coming up is on the 1st of July, which is on the topic of hygiene and sustainability in the wake of COVID. Will hygiene kill sustainability? And I will leave you on suspense for that one. So thank you, everybody. I did see a question about the costing in there. Do get in touch with us because it really depends on the size of your property, and how many hotels you are and where you are potentially. So the costing is a complicated one, but do let us know if you want any more questions. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you in our next session then.
Thank you.
Thank you.